Inside the Birds is back. What's going on, everybody? It's Geoff Mosher and Adam Caplan. I know a lot of people, Adam, were thinking, all right, part 2 of the really fun draft that they do and started on Monday, where they draft the NFC East, both offense and defense. We did offense, but we are going to get to defense on another day this week because obviously there was a lot of breaking Eagles news on Monday that we wanted to give you the best intel we could on, and so we're going to do that in this podcast, and then we'll get back to the draft in the next one. So did you wake up Monday morning and think, Adam, this was going to that's going to be a morning full of Eagles news? Was that on your radar?
Well, the JoeDouglas 1 week, we've kind of known this is
a
possibility for a little bit. So he comes back, we'll discuss that. Boy, that's a great move by Howie, by the way. That is a
very,
oh my God, because I know a lot of fans are like, man, why are they losing all these people? And we'll discuss that and kind of what Joe's role could be in a couple minutes. But the big one is Nick Sirianni, which everyone was expecting was going to get done soon. It got done. This is very important. You get that out of the way. Not that Nick's thinking about it. He knows he's going to be here for a long time anyway. He was in the final year of his 5-year deal, though. We should make that point. But this gets done. Jeffrey Lurie made it clear at the owners' meetings. This is a priority. They're going to get it done. He wasn't worried about it. Monday morning, Eagles making some news. We've got the tush push resolution one way or the other coming over the next 48 hours, by the way, in the spring meeting in Minneapolis, which, by the way, is usually very boring. I've been to these before. Very rarely does anything happen, but obviously the tush push thing, whether it's going to go through or not, whether it gets pushed again for another vote next spring remains to be seen, but we'll get news on that soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it'll be an interesting week of Eagles news. So Nick Sirianni gets rewarded with a 5-year contract. We'll start off with him, and then we'll get into.
It was on the final year.
I'm sorry. He gets rewarded, correct, with a new multi-year contract. He was in the final year of his 5-year deal. I do remember people wondering and thinking after his second year when they went to the Super Bowl, was Jeffrey Lurie going to rip that up right then and there and give him a new one? But obviously he gets it now. He wins the Super Bowl. One of the winningest coaches all time already, winning at a 70% clip, which is just unheard of almost in the NFL, up there with a lot of great names who've coached the game, guys like John Madden. He gets this deal, Adam, and there are a lot of components to this because I know there are some people that still don't understand what Nick does or don't really. Even there was one comment already I saw on YouTube, not really a fan of Nick. I feel like it's tough for him because he's a little bit of an awkward media guy, awkward talker in front of the microphone. I feel like it's tough for him to get the respect that maybe like a Pete Carroll or John Harbaugh have gotten, or a Mike Tomlin, although Mike Tomlin really is a defensive coach, because of the loaded roster, right? And also because he just doesn't maybe fit into that template of most people's perception of a head coach. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and I think what's happened, and we know there's been, just talking to some coaches around the league over the years about Nick, they don't know him, and I think part of it is that they see the thing that happened in Kansas City 2 years ago where he was going through the tunnel and he made the gesture, and I remember you pointing it out. You had heard some feedback from some folks around the league.
Sure,
so did I. But the good thing is, if you talk to the right people who've gotten to know Nick over a series of years, he's a pretty good guy. Boy, the players really, really like this guy. Even after what happened in 23, and Nick did not do a very good job that season, which we outlined then what the issues were. It wasn't just his situation with the quarterback. It was just the way he handled the losing streak and unable to reach the players like he needed to, and just the way he handled himself. And he got humbled. And you could either go one way or the other. You could either be defiant and act the same way and get fired, or you could take a look at yourself and accept responsibility and become a better head coach. And on your point, you mentioned the roster, and that's certainly true. Howie's done a great job for him, but you're not winning a Super Bowl just with a great roster. You actually have to be able to coach. And we've talked about this connecting thing since he was hired. It was the first nugget we got. We were told that connecting is big with him, and we didn't know what the hell it meant. We thought we knew what it meant, but we didn't really know. And that connecting thing is huge, because you can't survive a year like 23 without being able to reach your players at some point where they believe in you despite the collapse. And that to me showed a sign of growth for him.
It did. And to be able to come back the way he did. And then, by the way, that, the ability to say, and I think this really stands out because I remember saying not a lot of coaches would say it. They may feel it, but they wouldn't say it like this. But Nick said in the press conference that his offensive concepts had gotten stale. And that's why they were bringing Kellen Moore to bring a fresh look to the offense. And I remember saying it at the time, Adam. I can't remember too many head coaches that would be willing to come out and say, not head coaches, just coaches in general, that what I do has become stale, at least publicly admit it. They may think it, but to publicly admit it, I thought was big of him. And as you're mentioning, you bring in Kellen Moore, it's a totally different offensive system. Sure, they're going to work together, but he checked his ego at the door, wound up being a really good thing for the Eagles. Just like running the ball was a really good thing for the organization. Guys like to pass. We know that. But the Eagles won when they ran the ball a lot, and it worked. And so they checked their egos at the door, whoever it was, for the betterment of the team, and that got them to the Super Bowl, and they win. So I agree with you. I think Nick learned throughout the years. Now, some of the way he acts is a classic case of you can get away with it when you win, but when you lose, like when they were in that losing streak, right? It stands out and you get criticized for it. I don't think that'll ever change. I think he'll always be like that. So it's probably going to be important that he's always winning more games than he's losing because he just has that emotional outburst nature to him at times. Although even that was under control, I would say second half of the season, right? Wasn't it the Browns game where he was talking to the Eagles fans, right? And Dom had to pull him away. That was earlier in this past season. And you didn't see as much of that over the second half. So
yeah, it was at the end of the game, that one game, and it was just ridiculous. And it's this conduct not becoming a head coach. That's really the way that coaches around the league see it, who are aware of it, that I spoke with when it happened.
Agreed.
But I would say this: at the 23 season, let's call it like it is. Okay, he didn't have a choice. Okay, he had to have a new play caller. He wasn't running his offense anymore. He didn't have that choice if he wanted to come back as head coach.
Yeah,
everyone knows that. So Nick had to make a choice, but the odd one was that Kellen Moore, the guy he beat out for being the head coach, he hired him. It was, by the way, it was Nick's call,
right?
Like he wasn't forced to hire him. He had to run a different offense. He wasn't come back with the same offense. But like you make a fair point. But to admit it publicly, this offense was stale. You could use other words with it, but the bottom line is he made the change. They became a running team. Howie signed Barkley. They didn't really have much of a choice. They were not going to be a passing team anymore. Bring Barkley in with that offensive line, you're going to change it up. And it worked. Now, obviously, we'll see what happens here. Still going to run the ball a lot. Now, will it be as much with Kevin Patullo? We'll see. But the one thing I would tell you, though, now that he's getting his contract, let's see how he handles it. We know how players sometimes feel a little bit more empowered when they get paid, when they get their big contract extension. Nick gets this. I'd put it this way: we'll get into this contract in a couple of minutes, just what the ballpark idea of what it could look like. But he gets his big contract extension, and he's got to be careful of just thinking like he's the man. Like he's got his guy Kevin Patullo, right, who's one of his closest friends. Mm-hmm. If it's not going well with Kevin Patullo at any point, he's got to be supportive. He can't commandeer. He's got to be very, very careful how he handles himself, because that would be the one thing I'd worry about, is how he handles himself if things aren't going well.
Yeah, it's hard to. There are some guys where you can tell if they get a lot of money, or if you might see a change with him. He seems to be the same kind of guy, but you're right. You never know. You never know how the big money changes. Not who you are, but how you kind of walk around a place and what it puts into your head. That is something to monitor. And you're making a good point too about money, because the price tag for an NFL head coach, I feel, has raised
big time. Yeah.
Considerably. And when the Bears paid Ben Johnson, what did they give him, like a $13 million a year contract?
Yeah, I believe I had asked a coaching agent who looks at that stuff. He said he had heard 5 years, $65 million, $13 million a year.
Wow.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because that was my thinking. How in the world could Jimmy Sexton, his agent, take less than $13 million a season for comparatively? Because Ben Johnson's never been a head coach before.
Right.
Nick just won a Super Bowl. He's been in Super Bowl 2 out of the last 3 years.
Right.
Okay. This guy's one of the best head coaches in the National Football League. You could hate him all you want. I know he's got haters out there. it is what it is. I know he's pissed some people off, bothered some fans around the league. Who is this guy? Acts the way he does. But the bottom line is he wins. And he's got a great general manager who gets some great players. That helps, obviously. As Nick said, show me a good head coach who doesn't have good players. Totally true. Right. Can't argue against it. Bottom line is he deserves to be one of the highest paid head coaches in NFL history, which he should. Belichick still is the highest paid. I still believe that stands. There's conflicting information about how much he in his final contract with the Patriots, but we know this: Ben Johnson cannot be getting paid higher than Nick Sirianni. It just can't happen.
Well, I mean, I agree with you, but I also feel like when Ben Johnson got that contract, any coach, veteran coach who's won a Super Bowl or a bunch of playoff games could have demanded a renegotiation, whether it's Mike Tomlin or John Harbaugh or anybody. I don't know what Pete Carroll got from the Raiders, but he almost didn't the league kind of look at that like almost in a way like, I can't believe the Bears just did that.
I don't remember hearing that. But
I just remember hearing a lot of surprise and that this was going to throw. There was a situation too where somebody got paid a lot of money a couple of years ago, and the whole can't remember if it was baseball or football or whatever, and everybody.
Well, the one that it was ugly, the one that, and you know this, that other clubs could not stand what the Browns did of giving Watson that 5 years fully guaranteed contract. That right. That's probably the most negative comments I've ever gotten from personnel people and front office people around the NFL when that happened. They just couldn't beside themselves. Like, how could you possibly do this? Now with Ben Johnson, did he have leverage? Sure. Okay, he was the belle of the ball for the second straight year. He couldn't agree to a deal 2 years ago with Washington, and then this year he was the guy again. He perfect fit. Bears want him. He wanted the job. Stays in the division. Gets what we believe is $13 million a year. Again, I just can't imagine that Nick would take less than that. I'm not. I'm talking about Jimmy Sexton more, his agent. Of course, I just can't imagine he would take less than that because in fact, he might as well. Nick should set the bar. Nick should be getting like 15 a year, quite frankly.
Yeah, well, my first intuition was if that was the case, then it would probably be out there. But coaching salaries are different in that regard.
It's hard to find them. Yeah, it usually there's. I know some agents have said like they're not allowed to talk about it, but somehow it gets out. But whatever the case may be, Nick, to finish this off, Sirianni deserves this contract extension. Mm-hmm. I'm a realist in this business. If you could come back from what happened in 23, right? And somehow the next year win the Super Bowl, and I get it, the roster is very good. But to have that collapse, you saw what happened with Doug Peterson, okay? Who was that knight in shining armor when he came into Jacksonville. He was the guy that he was like the anti-Urban Meyer, right? He was the exact opposite, and they shocked the world. And then Doug got frayed at the end. If you saw him his last 4 or 5 weeks with Jacksonville, he kind of had enough. You could just tell he was fried.
Yeah.
With Nick, he just kind of regrouped. He really did. Yeah. So I don't know the guy personally, but I'm sort of a fan based on what I've heard about him. You and I were able to talk to some people who work with him with the Colts, so I had a decent framework of what he's like. But you don't know until they get the job, really, the way they'll handle themselves. But to move this along here, I just felt like the way that he handled himself, the way he bounced back, more often than not, he'd just go down the tubes and he'd get canned. But he didn't.
Right. Especially since they started off the year 2-2 after that slide. It's not like they hit the ground running.
Forgot about that. That's right. And by the way, there were whispers. What's wrong? What's wrong with
they were louder than whispers, bro.
Yeah, and then they wound up winning 16-17. So
crazy stuff. All right, last thing on Nick that I just wanted to float by you because it was asked to me by Mike Gill on 97.3 ESPN, our Football at 4 partner, is what does it mean for the future? And honestly, it's a great question because coaches are different than players. It's tough to get rid of Bryce Huff's contract, so you may have to have him on the 53. But if something were to happen where the Eagles were terrible, 5-12, and he's making terrible decisions, the owner is impulsive. But I do believe the owner believes in the coach. He wouldn't give him the contract if he doesn't. But the Eagles have to keep winning. Like he's not protected the way maybe an elite franchise quarterback would be given 1, 2, maybe even into that third year. Nick has to continue to win.
Well, I'll say this on that. There's no way, like, for instance, Mike Tomlin has not won a playoff game since 17.
Yeah.
That would never work here with Jeffrey.
Never.
There's just no ways accepting that. Now, Nick's got plenty of gravitas here. He could have 2 disappointing. By the way, he's not had a losing season. He's been to the playoffs each year.
Right.
He's got 2. I would say he's got 2 mulligans. He's got. Now again, if they're 3-14, that's a different story. But
no, you're probably right.
Hurt,
I would call it 1.5. If he went 3-14, that's going to be because
that would be pretty bad. But
it's going to be because of a ton of
context.
injuries, right? Not
Right.
talent. They're always going to. But then
could have context.
3-14, he gets the mulligan. But in the next year, they start off like 3-6. Then all of a sudden, you're going to be having a conversation. But
you say, Geoff. Listen, let's be honest about it. He lasted a long time. Okay, double-digit years.
True.
Chip Kelly got fired because he didn't handle himself well. I mean, anyone would have fired Chip. He just it was an absolute disaster. Chip ruined the building. I mean, it was bad. He didn't handle himself well. It's a shame. That's a 30 for 30. That 2015 year. Oh my God.
Yeah.
What? I don't. It's been 10 years. I cannot believe it, but it's been 10 years.
Yeah.
That story, the backstory to everything that happened that season. Howie's reassignment, Chip overseeing personnel, everything that happened that season is stuff you couldn't make up. And by the way, the off season when Chip got personnel control and Howie got reassigned, leading up to that, the reassignment of the rooms.
Plus, there were some terrible things that happened in the front office there that you and I know about that are not for public consumption. I'm not saying that to tease people. I'm just basically saying. Yeah. Whatever you think was bad, it was actually in some forms worse.
That's the point about it. That's the point about like Jeffrey he had to fire Chip, whereas with Andy, it was so obvious there had to be a change. Was it after 12 years?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like Jeffrey's had 7 or 8 head coaches in his time.
Nope.
You know?
Nope.
So.
All right, so that's the stuff with Nick Sirianni, and he gets his new contract. Let's transition over because the Eagles we've talked about one loss, but the Eagles have actually lost 3 guys in their personnel department, and all 3 of them had pretty decent titles. One we talked about is Anthony Patch. He goes to the Raiders. I mean, he was Howie's longest lieutenant in college scouting. Senior director of college scouting for the Eagles for many years, and he was
in any scouting, right? Was there anyone else who's tenured? Was there anyone else who was as tenured as Patched?
No, he was the longest tenured member, even longer than Howie.
Right, so, right. Whether it's college or pro, he was. In fact, he came from Miami? Did he not?
Yeah, he was 1 year in Miami as an intern, a scouting intern, and then with the Eagles. But I think
Hecker did Hecker bring him over?
So he came over prior to Heckert, I think, because his first year, Patch's first year would have to be. Who was before Heckert? I can't remember his name right now. Modrak?
The late Tom Modrak, yeah.
Modrak, yeah. I think that's who brought him.
Remember now, believe it or not, I think we may have talked about this once in 8 years. Mike McCartney, who's now Kirk Cousins' agent amongst others.
Yeah.
Mike was the pro director. Modrak was the general manager, or whatever title he had. I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
But that's another. By the way, that's everything that went on. What was the guy's name? Guy came from the Rams, who was the personnel director, who oversaw personnel. I could see the guy in front. I never met him, but I could see I could see the guy's face.
It's not the guy that from the Rams. Oh wow, that Samir had worked for, was it?
No, no, it's a different guy.
Okay.
In fact, there were a couple guys came from the Rams in the 90s. But anyway, so they lose Patch, and then Brandon Hunt gets a big time role.
Yep.
What was he the director? I know at one point his title with the Eagles was director of scouting, which can mean a lot. But he's now the Raiders VP of player personnel. By the way, folks, that's one step from being a general manager. That's a great job for him.
Very good job. And even though his title with the Eagles, Brandon Hunt, was director of scouting, I was told it was mostly pro. There was not a lot of
mostly pro. Okay.
Pro
and that was with the Steelers.
That was pro because he was a pro personnel guy with the Steelers.
Yeah. Okay.
Now he came to the Eagles to try to also add he did do some college scouting. It was something they wanted to get him more involved with, but his sector or his side was always mostly pro.
Well, and he's going to have to do both. When you have that title, you got to do both. So again, he's really, in a sense, one step from being a GM. And who was the other guy that left?
And the other guy was Jordan Dizon, the
Dizon, yeah.
former,
Oh, yeah. He
Jordan
went back to
Dizon.
Denver. Right. Yeah. How could I
Right,
forget? Yeah,
and he was
Jordan
the
Dizon.
former. He played linebacker for the Lions, if I'm not mistaken. Right.
I remember he was a will linebacker. Dizon, by the way, I can't even remember. I know he was the Eagles pro director. I just don't know. I don't know what his title. If I remember, he had a funky title. I don't know what it was, but I know he basically was a more or less a pro director, or assistant pro director or pro director, one of the two of them.
You're talking about Dizon with the Eagles?
Yeah, yes.
Oh, I think it was national scout. Was he not?
I know, but I think what happened was he basically he's now the. I know he was doing pro for the Eagles for a bit.
Yeah. Yes.
So
at one point, yes, he was that.
Yeah,
correct.
yeah. But anyway, he goes back to where it started from with the Broncos.
Mm-hmm.
He's working the pro side. So yeah, they've lost a lot of people, man. And who comes back? Joe D.
Yeah, big JoeDouglas coming back to the fold. And listen, I think it's a really significant addition. You're talking about a guy who, as we just mentioned, can do pro scouting, can do college scouting. When he was hired by Howie in 2000, a lot of people forget this. When he was hired by Howie, it was somewhat of a mandate. Remember, we just talked about Chip Kelly. And by the way, that October game against the Raiders, or November, whenever it is, people aren't talking about it much, but wait till the week before when it becomes Chip Kelly comes back to town week in Philadelphia. That's going to be very interesting on Sports Talk Radio. But getting back to what we're talking about with JoeDouglas, once Howie got his power back, you remember Jeffrey mandated that first they had to get through the draft. You know, Howie he had to do contract extensions. He had to totally regain his grip on the organization with Chip Kelly gone. But once the dust settled, Jeffrey had said, you need yourself a personnel guy, someone who's going to come in, lead the scouting department, and set the board. Because Howie hadn't earned the trust yet. He was restored, but he still had to prove himself. And so he was told he had to hire someone, and it can't just be one of his cronies. So he went outside the organization, and he brought in JoeDouglas from Chicago, Adam, but he was only there for a year.
Yeah,
he was really a Baltimore Ravens guy. That's what they were getting, a Baltimore Ravens system chain, Ozzie Newsome, Eric DeCosta kind of guy to come join the scouting staff.
Yeah, so when you look at Joe, he came in first after the 16 draft. So his first draft was 17, 18, and he left the Eagles after the 19 draft, I believe.
Yep.
And yeah, in fact, Mike McCagnon was the one I believe drafted Quinnen Williams. Yeah, because Joe came after the 19 draft when Quinnen Williams was drafted. So, and then he comes back. He's obviously, because he was general manager, he's like extensive pro and college work. And the thing that Joe shares that same vision Howie has is, as the Eagles have since Joe Banner and Jeffrey Lurie came in 1994. You win and lose by building on your offensive line and defensive lines. Joe believes in that. And that's why him and Howie have this great relationship, which they've had really since Joe left. They've kept in touch. And we've just mentioned all the guys who've left, not only this year, but really you can go back to Andrew Berry and see the Ian Cunningham, who's the assistant general manager of the Bears. You can look at so many guys who've left. Who else?
Joe brought in Andy Weidel. He brought in Ian Cunningham. He brought in Casey Weidel. I mean, he brought in guys who are no longer here, but he brought in two guys who are literally assistant GMs right now in Andy and Ian Cunningham. He did a lot. That was his job. Joe's job was to come in here and not just lead the scouting department as far as scouting and setting the board, but to also reshape the scouting department under Howie's supervision. And he did. He brought in a lot of these guys and they did well. That 2018 draft, it's only 5 picks, but it might be the best draft in the history of the franchise, right? I mean, it's an unbelievable draft. That's the Dallas Goedert, Josh Sweat, Jordan Mailata, Matt Pryor, who's still in the NFL.
Yeah, Maddox.
Who am I missing?
Maddox.
And Vontae Maddox. That's a great draft.
It's a really good draft. I mean, you get 3 starters, you get a starting nickel. That's pretty damn good. Yep. But although if Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell keep this up, just the level of eliteness that they had as rookies.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean that's you got to look at that too. But no, I agree with you. 2018 was a phenomenal draft. But This is interesting. I'm looking at the Raiders hierarchy, their player personnel department. I forgot Jonathan Stiegel, who was with the Eagles for like 4 years, many years ago, as I think a pro scout.
Yep.
He was here. They have another guy named John Hill, who's a Raiders area scout, was here in Philly for a brief period of time. So yeah, there's and of course the general manager Spytek, who was here for a bit. So yeah, they've got a lot of Eagles ties with the Raiders.
Oh, I trace that all to John Spytek. I think that's a big part of what he's trying to do. He's trying to get
but Stiegel's been Stiegel's was with the Raiders before John got there.
Right.
So yeah, so was John Hill. But here's the interesting thing, though, because I'm looking at everyone who's under him.
Mm-hmm.
A majority of them are guys he's inheriting. Like he hasn't. Champ Kelly left. He's with the Dolphins, but he's kept most of everyone. Almost everyone has stayed. But typically, what happens is when a new GM comes in, they make very few changes. They want to evaluate from now until the next draft, then decide who you keep and who moves on. So, but bottom line is, man, Howie's lost a lot of good people, and bringing Joe back is a big deal. And the kind of title it should have is senior personnel executive, which is sort of a all-encompassing whatever the general manager needs, whether it's pro or college scouting, mentoring for younger people under Howie, whatever it could be, whatever Howie needs, and because Joe knows Howie like the back of his hand, so they will work well together. And it's not like Joe needs any more money. He made life-changing money with the Jets. At this point of his career, he goes to a team and an organization he knows very, very well.
Yeah, and from what we understand, it's been in the works for a little bit. He's already, from what we've been told, moved back to the area. So he's going to hit the ground running here with the Eagles. And there's one other point I want to make. When you when you have JoeDouglas and you have Dave Caldwell, you have two former general managers in your scouting department. I know it's not the first time. I'm sure that's been the case before, but I still think that's fairly impressive. When you have two guys who have been GMs in your own personnel department. I would expect the Eagles to do two things. One, they will probably announce, as they always do, all of their promotions and additions in one fell swoop, probably, if not by the end of this week, soon. And then two, I wouldn't be surprised if there were still some more additions at I don't want to call them lower staff, but not big time guys. I think they've got enough of that, but they've got to flesh out because they've lost three guys. They've only added one, and the one they added does not necessarily fulfill the role of the three guys that they lost. So they need to add a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I would think. What's that?
I just wouldn't be surprised if they had like an area scout or something of that nature.
It does, because Ryan Myers, who should be announced as their new scouting director, Tiny's been with the organization for a number of years. In fact, he came in, I'm going to say around before or around when Chip Kelly became the Eagles head coach in 2013. So Myers has been with the organization. He was a West Coast scout, correct? I think.
Yes. Yeah, he's out there on the West.
Right, and Patch was their senior director of college scouting, something like that.
Yeah. Now, so like you can say Tiny will do that, right? And JoeDouglas will obviously come in and have a big imprint on scouting in general. So like Brandon Hunt did, but they really what they need is kind of that Jordan Dizon kind of guy where it maybe more of a region than as opposed to the national, but they need another guy. They need a scout, a mid-level guy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, this is around the time you do it because there's always movement 2 to 3 weeks after the draft. There's a ton of movement around the National Football League because contracts get renewed or not renewed and guys move on. And that's just, you really can't do this before the draft because first of all, it happens, but it's extremely rare that you fire someone before or you let a guy out of his contract before the draft because you don't want this guy going somewhere else and giving away your secrets,
Yes.
So
and by the way, for clarification, I shouldn't say they need another person because there's a lot of women in scouting. It's not necessarily a guy.
They lost Catherine Rage.
Number of women in scouting. Yeah.
They lost Catherine Rage to the Browns, right?
That's right, a couple of years ago. Yeah. Isn't she the assistant GM under Andrew Barry, right?
Yeah, I think so with Cleveland. Yeah.
Yeah. For some reason, I thought Minnesota, but no, this is
No, I
Cleveland.
think she interviewed for the GM job there. Did she not?
That's right. That's what it was, an interview. Yeah. So that's the state of the Eagles right now from an upper management / front office. Nick Sirianni gets a big extension, and JoeDouglas comes back to the franchise as the Eagles make some additions, even though they have lost some in the personnel staff. That's going to do it for this episode of Inside the Birds, the leading podcast in Eagles intel. And as always, we thank you for flying with us inside the bird.